Hey librarians, welcome to Librarian Week 2020. Like everything else, we're being a little bit different this year, but I am so glad you guys can join us. We are doing the book reviews online because we are unable to have you all here in the store, and we don't really want to meet out in the parking lot, as nice as the weather might be. So what I'm going to do is just the book reviews of some of the books that have come out since last October. So the list is a little bit longer because, as we all know, the April event got canceled, so we're going to just cover some more of the books. This list that I'm giving you online here is in the packet that you either can download or come into the store and get. And that way, if you have any questions about them, let me know at that time. So I'm just going to get started. I'm going to do them in order that they are on the sheet, so you can come back to this video later and go through it with your sheet if you need to. Otherwise, I will also try to remember to repeat the title and the author, so if you are keeping notes, you can keep up with me. So the first one, these are in no particular order. So book number one is Fragments of Light by Michelle Phoenix. And first of all, let me say I am so glad Michelle is back writing. I have missed her. Her books are phenomenal. Go back and find some of her older titles and read them. You'll love them. This one is a dual time set during World War II and contemporary. The contemporary story, a friend promises another woman that she is going to help her find her father. Her father had returned from World War II, and shortly after coming back, walks away from the family farm and disappears. And the adult woman still feels like that abandoned child. So you have those issues in there, but you also have a marriage that is in trouble, and how that happened and how we could maybe even combat it in our own families. So it's really kind of an interesting story that there's two very big issues in the story, and I really like that about Michelle's book. I've also actually had men read this book because of the World War II part of it, but also because it's very low on romance, but it also visits some of the scenes in Normandy, and so they revisit some of those places, and it makes for a really, really good read. So historical, but dual time is probably a better way to put it, but a good read. Our next book is The White Rose Resists by Amanda Barrett. Amanda is one of our local authors. Her and her family come in every once in a while, and it's always fun to visit with them and hear what she is writing on next. The White Rose Resist is actually based on a true story of college students who were doing underground work against the Nazis during World War II. All the way through the book, I kept thinking of the phrase that Esther repeated over and over, I was born for such a time as this. And watching them do just something. It wasn't major. They weren't blowing up buildings. They weren't, trying to assassinate Hitler, but they were doing something. And that is all that God ever asks of us, is to do something. And so I love that Amanda weaves that into her story, and she puts faces on these historical characters that we know very, very little about sometimes. So it's one of those, again, that is a good guidebook. There is a good historical element to it, and it's just an enjoyable read. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Amanda does next. Who else is she going to uncover in history for us? Cynthia Rucci's Afraid of the Light is the next book, and it is a very different book, but it's a very, very good read, because I was hesitant to read it, not because I don't like Cynthia's writing. I love it. I love all of her books, but because it's about hoarding, and I'm like, I don't know anything about hoarding. I don't know anybody that does that. I do tease people about it, and people tease me about it, but of course they're talking about buildings full of stuff. But it talks about Cynthia also talks about how we do have those little sacred things that we don't want anybody to know that we do or have in our lives. And it talks about how we need to deal with it. And one of the things is that because these hoarders are afraid of the light, that's why the curtains are quite often shut. And such, because I don't want anybody to see, and if they have light, then you can see, they themselves can see, but there are times we need to let that light in on our own life to reveal what that hoarding is that we are protecting. So just a really interesting read. The characters are well done. The main character is a counselor, and to be honest with you, I want her to be my counselor because she was just really, really good, very lovable, but you also become very sympathetic, and you understand the hoarding and how that is such an issue for some people. So well done, Cynthia. I really appreciate books like this that take me to somebody else's life and help me understand them. The Summer House by Lauren K. Denton. This is just a fun read. It's this young lady, she wakes up one morning and there's a note on the table from her husband, and next to it are divorce papers, and he says, "I can't do this anymore." And he walks away from her and asks that she signs the papers. And so she needs to find a job to support herself. She is in a new city. They had just moved there a few short months before that. So she needs to find a job where she knows nobody. She doesn't have a church family. She doesn't have family members living there or old friends. So she needs to go out, and she ends up being a hairstylist at a retirement community. And if ever I find a retirement community like that one, I will move in immediately, because the characters and the people you meet are all very quirky, and they all have their little thing, but they also are all family. They take care of their own. The parts where you're thinking, oh, that person, I can't believe they let that person do that. And then as you read the story, you understand why the person is that way. And the whole community understands that, so they let that person be that way, and such. So to be able to do that in your writing, where you become part of that community and you wish you lived there, is an amazing thing. So there are parts that are going to make you laugh right out loud. You're going to be jealous of where they live, which is right on a bayou and down south, where it's like, I want to live there, even though they talk about the alligators in the bayou, which I'm not really excited about. But it's a good story. Anything by Lauren is, they're all standalones. They're all set. They're all considered Southern fiction, Southern women's fiction. Yes, guys, sorry on that one. But she's a good read. She is a perfect summer read, whether you actually read them in the summer or in January. Set the Stars Alight by Amanda Dykes. This is Amanda's sophomore book, and usually a sophomore book can be a little bit lagging according to a first book, but I will tell you that Amanda did not miss a beat. This book is fantastic. It again is dual time. It is a modern story of two children and then grow up to be adults that knew each other. The young man was kind of a lost soul. His mom traveled a lot. He didn't know his dad. And so the young lady's family just kind of adopted him, and they kind of grew up together. He always, of course, went home, but he spent a lot of time at her house. And they were just really good friends. And they kind of went their separate way when her parents passed away. And so this is them finding each other back. And then the historical story is during the Napoleon Wars, so it goes back quite a bit, but it includes some pirates and all that fun stuff. So, and I don't want to give away too much of that storyline because there's a little bit of a mystery with it, and which makes for a fun read. So Amanda's other one, make sure you pick that one up too if you haven't already. To be honest with you, I do recommend these to guys. Just because there is that good element. Her romance part of it is very quiet, and it is more a study of characters and personal, behaviors. Hadley Beckett's Next Dish by Bethany Turner is a rom-com, plain and simple, laugh out loud, funny. If you like cooking shows at all, whether it's the Great British Baking Show or Chopped or any of the other ones that are on TV, you should be reading this book because it's hilarious. It is about Hadley Beckett, and she is a famous chef. She has her own TV show, and so she joins this one competition, and there's a very arrogant chef on there, and then they kind of fight. And you know from the beginning in these rom-coms who's going to get together. The fun part is that journey of how they get from where they're arguing to where they are actually falling in love. So I'm not really giving anything away there, but again, it's just a delight to read. But one of the things you got to remember about Bethany's books is, as funny as they are, there is a very serious undertone on some of it. She does address some big issues. Premarital sex is one that comes up in this book, and good, bad, and why not sort of thing. And so it's an interesting discussion, and I really like that where Bethany includes that in this delightfully funny little book that even I would recommend easily to 16-year-olds and older, just because of that issue in there. But you got an author who has this way of reaching people that not everybody can, and now she has something in there that creates a great discussion. So remember her, but like I said, if you're looking for somebody that just needs a funny read, that's a good one. Catherine Turner's Literature and Lattes is actually a sequel to the bookstore book that she wrote before this. You will meet some of your characters. They do kind of drift around in the background. Some of them are a little more main characters, but it was but that's because their daughter is one of the main characters, so you get to see them. But it talks about forgiveness and how sometimes what we think happened isn't what was happening, and such like that. So, but it also continues that story that you knew about in the other ones. So I really, really like that Catherine does that, but also she includes bookstores, which, you know, always makes for a good read. So. The Waterkeeper by Charles Martin. First of all, if you're not reading Charles Martin, you should be reading Charles Martin. He writes where men and women are enjoying his books thoroughly. This one, I did find out a little while ago that it is a book one of a series, which I am completely excited about because this ends in a way where you're like, I need to know what else is going to happen. So I was glad to hear he's going to continue it. This one actually deals in human trafficking. So I do recommend 18 and older. Just because of some of the situations, there's nothing bad written in here. There's nothing inappropriate written in here. Charles himself said that you know, he knows our imaginations are good enough that he doesn't need to write them, and so we can understand that ourselves. So he does it, and I really appreciate that about him. But he does make it very clear that the people that are dealing with the human traffickers themselves, not the victims, but the human traffickers themselves, are not good people. So that's why I think 18 and older, because there are some times when you meet the bad guys, so to speak, the situations are not good. But like I said, anything by Charles Martin, go ahead and read it. They're just fantastic. I can't wait to see what else he comes up with and what part 2 is going to be in this series. And the next book is A Mosaic of Wings by Kimberly Duffy. It is her debut novel. It is set in India. It is straight historical romance. You know, you got guys that like to read about India and bugs. This would be a great bug book, but you have to warn them that there's a lot of romance in it. So, and I will warn you, there's a lot of bugs in it too, and that spider, I know. Spiders are bad. So, but no, it is a beautiful and colorfully written book. I mean, the descriptions in there, you feel like you're in India. You can almost smell it and feel it in the humidity and the heat and such. And that's a gift that a writer can give you when you can know what it's like. And I've never been to India. And that to me was just well written. So I'm looking forward to Kimberly's next writing. I believe she's got one coming out in 2021. If you want to know the date, let me know and I can get it for you. I just don't remember it off the top of my head. So, Lisa Wingate's new one, The Book of Lost Friends. Most of us remember her Before We Were Yours, and the topic in there, and how brutal it was how brutally hard it was to read that book because of the topic. This one is still a well-written book. Thankfully, it's not quite as difficult to read about. Even though it does tackle the end of the Civil War, and then the difference as in 1986 between a very rich city and a small town's high school, and so you have racism and you also have poverty in these issues in there. So it's still not an easy book to read, but it's Before We Were Yours was kind of in its own little spot. But this one, the black churches had a magazine or a newspaper that would go around the country, and they would, for a quarter or 50 cents, allow you to put a letter in there. And these people were looking for their moms and dads and their children and their spouses or their siblings who were sold off in slavery. And she includes those in there, snapshots of those, so you get to read some of the actual letters, and they will break your heart, because I can't imagine not knowing where any of my children are. And I know people deal with that. I do. But so this one, very timely, very well done book. And it always amazes me that this book, and then there's a couple other ones that you will know, they're very timely for the time we were living in and are living in. And this book was started contracted 2 years ago or more. So you know that, God had that planned already. So I love when authors are able to, obviously see that happen. And we get the fruits of that labor. Valerie Lucy's next one, The Key to Everything, is an up and coming of age book about a young man whose father rode his bike from the top of Florida all the way down to Key West. And his father passes away, and so he is trying to understand his father more. And so he decides to go on the same bike ride, and we get to go along. Thankfully, we don't have to ride the bike because that is a lot of work, and I'm okay with that. There are times when I was reading, I'm like, oh, that'd be really cool to do. And then I'd go, no, I don't want to ride a bike 100 miles a day. So we will just enjoy Valerie's story instead. So the young man there, as he travels from town to town to town and then ends up in Key West, and as he understands his father as a teenager, the same age he was, and how we need to understand our parents a little bit too, and we do as we get older. So it's a very interesting book, a very good guidebook, and to be honest with you, I would probably easily give this to a teenager to read also. Not to give them the idea to ride their bike down to Key West, but because it is a coming of age story. So our next book is What Mama Left Behind by Cindy Sporles. Cindy's books are always fascinating to me because they're not gentle stories by any stretch of the imagination. They're not harsh, they're just real stories about real people and where they live. I should rephrase that because they're not based on true stories. Sorry, but the people in them become very real, and it's how they are in that area she's writing about. And these are the Appalachian Mountains, and this one is about a daughter whose mother commits suicide, and she cannot figure out why she would do that. And what Mama left behind and why she left it behind becomes a very interesting story. So the dialect and the writing in it is very true to that time period, and also where they are from, and I really appreciate that. It just sometimes your grammar's not going to be correct, and I know if that drives you bananas, it's going to be a hard book to read. But let me recommend that one to you because it is that good. So The Happy Camper by Melody Carlson. I included this one because it was just a cute story. It does have some really good stories about reconciliation with your parents and with others, but it also has a DIY of campers, not camping, campers. And so how she actually refurbishes this camper and makes it so you can actually live there. So it's kind of fun to read. And Melody Carlson's books are always good. They always have a good undertone in there where you know that the issue she's addressing in there. She does it very gently sometimes, but sometimes she does it with like, you got to know this and I need to tell you this. So I really enjoy that part of it. There are some laugh out loud funny parts. It also was some of the parts were like, well, I know I will never be redoing a camper because I can't do that. So it's a good reminder that sometimes we should leave that stuff to other people. So Children of the Stars by Mario Escobar. Mario's books are written in a different language and then translated into English, which I have had other readers and myself, you can realize that the sentence structure is a little weird, but it works, and they're brilliantly written. They're good stories. This is actually about two young boys, and they were living in Paris during the time when the Nazis suddenly decided to do the round of all the Jews. And they actually escaped from it. But now they're in Paris on their own because their parents were picked up, and they're trying to find out what to do. So the oldest one remembers that Dad talking about this place in southern France where they were going to go to get away from this. And so they decide to do that. Now, two young boys in normal time running through the countryside is unusual. These two boys had to stay in hiding because they were obviously Jewish and they would get picked up by the Nazis. Also, anybody caught helping them could be shot. So how do you do that? Well, it turns out this was something that did actually happen. Not the two boys in general, because Mario takes many stories and combines it into one. But there was like this underground in France where these people could go from house to house to house and make it to southern France and sometimes even to Switzerland or other places where it was safe for them to be. So Mario takes those and combines them into this really cool story. Some of the people that help the boys do it very greatly, like this is what I want to do, and then there's other ones that grumble all the way through it. It makes you think about what would you do, and I don't know until such a time as that. I wouldn't be able to tell you whether I would love to say, yep, I'd be one of those, I'd be happy to do it, share all my food, but the thought of being shot and killed or my family or whatever would be a deterrent. So before we judged quickly of the ones that didn't want to do it, remember there were extenuating circumstances to it. So He does have a new one out called Remember Me. It just came out last week, so it didn't make this list, and I haven't had a chance to read it, but it's about the Spanish Civil War, so you might want to check that one out too. The June Boys by Court Stevens. This is a teen book, but let me tell you, anybody that wants to read a really good straight mystery, read this book. It's really, really well done. I pride myself on how fast I can figure out a mystery book, and I will tell you right now, I didn't even get it all right. I got some of it right, yay me, but I didn't get it all right, and that is good writing, because as I think back to the story after I found out the whodunit part of it, Court was very good about leaving clues all the way through. I just didn't pick them all up. I picked up the clues I wanted. The premise of the story is these young boys get picked up on June 1. A year later, on June 30th, they're brought back to their families. They are not hurt, they are well taken care of, and almost like they are loved. So who is taking them and what are they doing with them? Because the boys just disappear for a year and 1 month. As evidence arises, this other teenage girl finds out that is it her dad that is the June boys' kidnapper. So now what do you do? So you get to look at the clues as this teenager tries to figure out what is going on, and hence the mystery. And it is really very well, like I said before, well written. Easily you can give it to any teenager that wants to read it, even 13 and up. It's a little intense in spots, so if you have somebody that doesn't like those kind of books, make sure you don't recommend it to them. But I would even recommend it to anybody adult-wise that likes a good mystery. And our next book is Veiled in Smoke by Jocelyn Green. It's book number 2 of the Chicago series. I don't remember the exact name, sorry about that, and it releases early in 2021. Hopefully you can see the graphic that goes with it and you'll get the title that way. I love Jocelyn's books because hers are straight history. They are wonderfully and well researched. Some of the things you find out about the books, and I should say the characters in the book, are things that she found out in research. With this book, it is set just before, during, and then after the Chicago fire, and how certain things were happening. She gives you such a good setting of what it was like in Chicago for people, whether the very rich and the very poor at that time. So you get to know those people, and then as you move through this fire and how that happened and how that became a great equalizer, because there was nothing left in Chicago. I mean, the police department was gone, any of the government buildings that would have been helpful, churches that might have been able to help people, they were all gone. So everybody was in the same boat. They had nothing. Some of them were in their pajamas yet. That's how they left their homes, because they left in a hurry. So when you read books like that and you learn about what people went through at that time, and you get to understand what it's like where a whole city is just devastated. Personally, if you have a fire, it's one family. This was, thousands and thousands of people that needed to be fed and clothed, and winter was coming. So how do you as a city react to that? So I love Jocelyn's books. I've read them all. Let me tell you, if you haven't, please go find them. Like I said, this is book 1 of a 3-book series, all set in the white city of Chicago, and I am looking forward to book number 2. Daughter of Rome by Tessa Afshar. If you like biblical fiction, Tessa is an author you should be reading. Phenomenally able to put the face on a biblical character, whether it is the main character that you know or somebody that would be like a background character you might not have read about in the Bible but was set during biblical times. This one is a story of a young lady who comes from an upper crust of the Roman Empire. She was born to her father's mistress, and so she's not really one of the family. But yet they, by law, have to take care of her because her father recognizes her. So there's that tension. But then she meets these people that are Christians and becomes a Christian. And there she meets somebody that actually comes from Jerusalem and is the Jewish Jew and such. So, and there's, if you're Roman and I'm Jew, you can't speak to me and I can't talk to you. But Paul gets involved, and so you have all these different little parts of that society that kind of you don't think about. for me to say, well, I was born in Grand Rapids and I'm this and that and the other thing and I can't talk to you would be ridiculous because that's just stupid. But that was part of their society. So it's good to remember that because in the Bible passages that becomes why things are done and said in certain ways. So I love Tessa's books. Go find them. She's got a couple different ones on different. I like Rahab is probably one of my favorite ones. So. But those are all really good books. So men, women, it doesn't matter. Just go find her books. And excitingly, the next one I get to bring you is Susie Finkbinder's The Stories That Bind Us. I love Susie's books because she writes where we all want to live, which is in these small towns where they all take care of each other. It doesn't mean they always agree, but they do take care of each other. And for those that wonder, it's a small town in Michigan. It is a made-up town, okay? Susie will tell you that immediately. But it is about Betty Sweet, not Betsy, and how she has lost her husband and how she's going to deal with that. And laying in bed with the covers over your head isn't the correct way to deal with that. Not that I don't blame her, I will probably do the same thing, but it also not only deals with that loss, that major loss in her life, but it also deals with her sibling who's dealing with mental illness and a biracial child and racism and how people react. And so you have this gentle story that has these issues running through it, and it's so much like real life. How we have these lives that we're living and we're all dealing with these different issues and how do we help each other with them and how do we deal with them ourselves. So reading a Susie book is like coming home. It's like being there with her. So I enjoy them. I recommend them continuously, male and female readers, young and old. They're just really, really well done books. And I'm looking forward to the next book that comes out in 2021. The Fifth Avenue Story Society by Rachel Hawk. I really like this story. I didn't know what I was getting into, to be honest with you. When I first picked it up, I thought it was going to be about a book club. Go figure. So what it is 5 people got very strange invites to a story society. And they don't know why they're getting it, and they don't know who sent them. And so as they meet the first time, there's a lot of tension in the room. And that's because everybody has brought along a lot of baggage and nobody wants to acknowledge their baggage. They don't want to deal with it. They would rather have left it home, but it comes with you. You know how baggage is. It's always showing up somewhere. And so that is this story. And each of the chapters and each of the sections, well, I shouldn't say each of the sections. There's different sections in chapters too that has a perspective from each of the characters. So you have your first person be somebody different. And to walk that mile in somebody else's shoes is how you understand them. And so Rachel lets you do that in this book. And it's fascinating because what you see at the beginning is not the person you're going to get at the end. And isn't that the truth? Because sometimes we make a snap judgment on why we like or dislike somebody. But once we get to know them, we know better. So well done. I enjoyed it. It's not a book club book in that they're not a book club, but a book club should do it. Dearly Beloved by Kara Wall is a book that a friend of mine recommended to me. She had it recommended to her. She read it and thoroughly enjoyed it. And so she's like, you got to read it. And she's right. I think you got to read it. It's about 2 different couples. They are the pastors. The husbands are the pastors of a church in Greenwich Village in the 60s. And the turbulent time that is going on in America. And so those issues are in there. But what I found fascinating is this is the story of those 4 people. It's not the story of the congregation. It's not the story of the people that they meet in the different committees or things that they do as a church. It is their 4 stories. It's about their faith. It is about the loss of faith. It is about their finding their faith. It has all the things that you don't think of that pastors and their wives might struggle with, or pastors and their husbands to be fair both ways. You know, and it's such an interesting story because it's very relevant to now. Because, you know, there's a lot of things that happened in the 60s that are happening now. And, you know, we're repeating ourselves here, but we can learn from each other too. So well done. It is not what I would consider a Christian fiction, but I will tell you it's completely clean. You can easily put it on your librarian shelf without any problem. And if all else fails, you should probably read the book because it's that good. Long time coming, Robin W. Pearson. She writes a brilliant book about a mother and daughter, and a grandmother, and the grandmother's story, and how much that story impacted how the daughter, but also the granddaughter, acts, and what they know and what they don't know, and how little of grandma's story they actually know, because they just assumed they knew it. And that to me is, you know, a reminder that sometimes I need to ask, because I can't assume I know your story. And it's one of the things I do regret now, that I didn't ask my mom and or my grandparents more often their story. In my defense, when I was grandparents, it was, you know, I was younger, so, but it's not fair. But I think of that now, and I love hearing those stories and why things are. You know, you go back to why you like or dislike a person, and it's like, well, they're always really grumpy. Well, why are they always grumpy? There's usually a story there. So Robin reminds us of that, and I love that part of the story. And again, it's just a beautiful story that unfolds. It's a contemporary story set in the southern South, so it's kind of that southern fiction. But to be honest with you, they could have sat it anywhere in the U.S. We all can relate to that family. So the next one we have is The Bright Unknown by Elizabeth Byler Yachts. This one came out shortly after we got together for Librarians Day. In fact, I think you could special order it during that. So some of you might already own it, but I didn't want to miss out on it. This is a brilliant story written about mental illness, what it was like to live in an insane asylum from the perspective of a young lady that was raised there because she was born to a mother who was put into the insane asylum by her husband. And she's never known any other story or any other place to live. She's 16 and starting to come into her own and realizing that this is not the normal. And so she has to adjust. Her life has been, I mean, she's not been abused, but there's a lot that goes on. And so when she has a friend come in, the young lady is 16 and they meet there in the asylum, and this woman, or this young lady, is put there by her father because she has fallen in love with the wrong man. So she must be, well, insane. So dad is controlling and puts her in an insane asylum. And so it's their whole story. Not an easy read, not a comfortable read, but brilliantly done. It's another one of those that I like to say, you should read this. I don't say that very often, and now I've said it twice in just a few minutes. Because there are these stories you need to read to understand things. I'm going to go back to the Lisa Wingate book, Before We Were Yours. That's one of those two. You read it because then you understand that story. This one, you understand the story of mental illness and what that was like and why we don't do things the way we do, but we need to pay attention so they don't happen again. So Elizabeth, I mean, to be honest with you, if you can find her books, find them and read them. They're that good. While research, she's got more coming. I can't wait to read them. So, but like I said, not an easy read. Don't take it on a vacation where you think you're going to just have a light read. Just so you know. And then you have Amanda Cox's new one, The Edge of Belonging. This book caught me from page 1. It just released a few short weeks ago. I was reading it one afternoon here at the store because I was waiting for my computer to run a program, and suddenly I realized I had been reading for 45 minutes. The program was done running and was waiting for me to do something, but I was in this story. I had read 3 or 4 chapters already. Oops. Thankfully, I can blame it on, this is part of my job. I was reading this book to check it out on purpose. So. But I will tell you, it is really well done. It is considered a dual time, but the dual time is actually the person's story, both times, as an adult and as a child. And it is so good. I can't tell you parts of it because it'll give away the whole storyline. But know that Amanda's way of writing and the word descriptions she gives and the people you meet are just so good. that you want to move there and meet them. They must exist, right? I should go meet them. I should go and introduce myself and become friends with them. So so just know that if you have something important to do, maybe that might not be a good book to start. If you're going on vacation, it's the perfect book to take with you. But bring more, because you're going to read it quickly. I will tell you that. When I brought it home that weekend, I had it done on Saturday. Thankfully, it was a rainy, yucky day, so I had an excuse to stay inside and read. Just be prepared. So I am looking forward to finding out what Amanda's going to do next. Hopefully, we'll find out in 2021. Patrick Carr, the end of the Magi. When I first was presented this book, even though everybody told me this is not a Christmas story, I'm like, well, it's got to be. Who else writes about Magi except for around Christmas, right? Right. They were right. I was wrong. Go figure. It has the Christmas story in it, but it's so much more than that, because it talks about, in the beginning of it, how with the Magi, they were seeing the fulfillment of this prophecy of this king that they needed to go see. So you have all that and all this undercurrents there, but you also have the Roman Empire and how these Magi had to act in the Roman Empire, and who was in charge and who wasn't in charge, and could they move through the empire, and where could they go and not go. And I never thought of that. I just figured they got on their camels and then rode to Bethlehem. But did they? You know, and how far in advance did they know? Because we know by historical facts, we know that Jesus was probably 2 years old or a little bit younger when the Magi got there. They, you know, according to our nativity scenes, they're there at the same time as the shepherds, but we know better. Thankfully, we know history now. But anyway, so it deals with that a lot, but it also deals with what happened to these Magi after they were introduced to Jesus. So there's more there. So to say it is that is wrong. I know, but it is a historical story, and it's a very well done one, and a lot of research went into it, and I really, really like Patrick's writing. So I'm hoping that maybe he will do more of stuff like this. He has been known for his fantasy books, which are very good, by the way, and very good, worth reading. But I like this. I think he's hitting his stride here, and I'm hoping we'll get more from him that way. And the next book is Under the Tulip Tree by Michelle Shockley. This is a dual time set during and at the end, or the beginning of the Civil War, a little bit before that, and then in the Depression in the 30s. Interesting. I mean, there's the connection of Frankie. Frankie is the slave you're going to hear about and hear her story set during and up to and through the Civil War. And then she is telling her story during the Depression to a newspaper reporter. And so how that also connects in different ways. Very timely. It doesn't sugarcoat slavery. In fact, it'll leave you uncomfortable, as it should anyways. But there's parts of her story that are disturbing to read about, and that is good to be reminded of that, because that is a dark blot on our history that we have to remember so we don't allow it to repeat. But anyways, in this, you're going to love Frankie. She is just the neatest person. I wanted to meet her. And the people that interview her and get to know her and her family and stuff, you're going to get to know all of them. And because of the timing and the time frame of the story, it is so fun to read, because seeing how one can, the next generation can be impacted by that generation. You go back to, the story I was talking about a little bit a while ago with Robin, is how does this granddaughter act because of this grandmother? And you have this where you have, why does Frankie's children the way they are? Because that's how Frankie raised them, and why. So well done. I'm hoping to get more from Michelle soon. We will. I haven't heard anything, but I'm assuming with the amount of how well that is done, we will be getting another one soon. Collision does not have that many eyes in it, but I wanted to see how many I could put in one, and it turns out 2, and it doesn't need that many. But anyways, Collision of Lies by Tom Threadgill. Straight mystery. Seriously. There is romance in it, but it's like this much. And it's a hoot, by the way. And you will get a kick out of that romance. But the other part of it is that I was fascinated, because you have a male author who is writing a very strong and very believable female lead. Not somebody that is going to need, I need my tire changed. She's not a princess. She does it herself, and I appreciated that. But the interaction with the male characters, there's respect for each other. And they are fellow employees, and they have good friendships, but they don't fall madly in love 5 minutes after they meet. They understand each other, they work together, they know each other's spouses, or if they're single, those sort of things. And I like that part of it, because we all work with men and women, and how we get along well, and I so appreciated that. But the mystery part of it, I will admit, I very pridefully say I did kind of sort of figure it out, but I needed a really strong clue. Thank you, Tom, for giving me that so I could figure it out. But I loved it. It was so good. Book number 2 is due out soon, I believe before the end of this year, beginning of next year, and I'm looking forward to it. You will need to read these in order. These are going to build on each other. And to be honest with you, every time I find somebody that read this book, I talk to them about it, because it's a fun one to discuss, because the mystery in it is so well done. Jane Kirkpatrick, I have been reading her books for more years than I care to admit, because that makes both of us a little bit older than we want to be. She is fascinating because she finds these women in history that have these tiny little lines of something in somebody's journal somewhere, and then gives us the story that goes with it. And it's wonderful, because this one is about standing up for what you believe in, even if it sometimes costs you everything. This is a story of one of the women who was a suffragist out on the West Coast in Oregon. And what it might or might not cost her to be that. She ran her own newspaper. She owned land and such, but also raised a family and had a husband who loved her and supported her. So to me, that is what you want. But some of that was illegal, because at the very beginning of the book, way at the beginning, I was reading some of the things that were, because she was talking about them and some of the laws, and she couldn't own a business. She had no right to vote. She couldn't own land, and her 2 job possibilities were nanny or teacher, which, by the way, I would qualify for neither. So I would have, if she didn't marry. So here's a woman who has 3 prospects: marriage, teaching, or being a nanny or a nurse, I guess. And it's like, no wonder our women and our girls were struggling. So to read that and to find out how she fought so hard to make those laws changed, I love that and that part of it. So interesting. Like I said, Jane's books are always like that. They're always based on real characters, but they give you that whole entire story instead. The next story is The Haunting at Bonadventure Circus by Jamie Jo Wright. Love Jamie Jo, by the way. We're going to have an event with her in our virtual author event on October 29th. It's a free event. Please join us. You can sign up at our events on our Facebook page, our events on our website, bakerbookhouse.com. And I love Jamie's books. I have to admit that I had, people are all like, oh, I didn't read this one at night. I did. I'm sorry. But maybe Jamie, I'm getting used to Jamie. I don't know. She's going to have to make them scary. But if you like circuses at all, perfect book for you. If you hate circuses, this is also a perfect book for you. It is a dual time. Again, Jamie writes in that, and I love that because, again, history's connected to each other. But there is this wonderful mystery, and is it a serial killer? And that is what we need to find out. She does include some of her own life in here because of the disease that she struggled with. She also gives it to her character, and that really helps, at least me, understand that disease a little bit more. So it's very interesting that way, and I thank you for that, Jamie, because it makes me able to understand some of the struggles you guys go through. But there's also these really neat characters. You'll meet Lily, and I'm going to let you meet Lily on your own. She's probably one of my favorite characters in the book. A lot of people like her a lot. So, but again, you got a straight mystery here. You have a little bit of romance, but it's just the mystery. It is the development of that. So I'm looking forward to the 29th, but I'm also looking forward to Jamie's book, next book, which is coming out next year. all her books are standalones. I know that's going to be a question. So, and then Librarian of Boone's Hollow by Kim Bogle-Sawyer. On the day that I taped this, I'm almost done with this book. I was reading it, an advanced copy, and then a couple things happened, so I slowed down on it, but I am really enjoying this. This is the story of the women that got on mule and horseback and brought books up into the Appalachian Mountains, and all the different people that are there. And I'll tell you right now, that is probably one of my favorite thoughts of a job. I would probably have loved that, because then I could ride horses and I had to do with books. There was a lot more to it, I'm sure. In fact, this book story does tell us that. So it is set during the Depression, and it is part of some of the poorest parts of the American that was going on at that time. These families had nothing. And so for them to be able to, even if it's just picture books, but they were able to have them in their home and take them in. And so these kids found out what magic books could do, and so that would make them want to learn more. So anything by Kim, just go ahead and read it. They're all really well done. This one tackles illiteracy, and that I think is really kind of cool. So I do enjoy it. There is a romance in it, but the historical part of it is phenomenal. The Conqueror by Brian Litfin. I spelled that wrong. It's the Litfin. Sorry, Brian. This is actually set in Rome in 300 AD, if I remember correctly. So it's after the time of Christ. It is where the Roman Empire has gone through, where the Colosseum and all those are in great use. So there is the persecution and such going on with them, but Brian also brings it into where it's the time where it's going into where Rome becomes a Christian empire. And so how that is happening. The whole book is very interesting. I love that part of history. It's fascinating. But what I found, and it made me giggle, it made me roll my eyes, and it made me frustrated, but a lot of the things that we argue about in churches nowadays, they were arguing about it back then. So we have learned absolutely nothing, which is frustrating, but it made for a really good story because it makes it relatable, because we're all the same. I mean, these people lived thousands of years before I did, and yet they argue about the same things I do, whereas a lot of people would like to think that the people in history didn't argue about things. Now, of course, they're not arguing about cell phone usage, we know that, but they are arguing about other things. So, and they also are getting along with other things. So I do strongly recommend this for male readers. They will, especially if you have a historical lover of books, he will very much enjoy this. I really, really enjoyed it. Really opened my eyes to some of the stuff that was going on at that time. 9 by Rochelle Decker. This is kind of a sequel to The Girl Behind the Red Rope, but not quite. I recommend them in order if you can, but if you don't, you won't miss a beat. But this is about a young lady, and she has one rule, and that's to not get involved. And then gets involved one night with a young lady who seems a little lost and confused, and so kind of takes her under her wing. Begrudgingly is probably a good word for it. And what happens from there, and why are all those government people chasing them? But that's probably all I should say about that book, because I don't want to give something away either, because it is good. I really enjoy Rochelle's writing. It's got a good action adventure to it. It always has a little bit of a spiritual element to it, and it also has a little bit of a what if element to it. So I really did. I really enjoyed that book. I like The Girl Behind the Red Rope also. So makes for 2 really good reads. And by the way, you could actually read the teenagers could easily read these and enjoy both of them. So we only have a couple more. Second to the last one is These Nameless Things by Sean Smucker. I'm going to tell you right now, I put off reading this book on purpose. Not because it's not a good book, but for the opposite reason, because it is so well done. I have an ARC at home that has underlining and writing in it. An ARC is an advanced reader's copy. Because of the way Sean writes and some of the phrases he puts together and some of the meaning he has in there. This book has been advertised a lot of different ways. I really don't know what genre to put it in because it doesn't fit in any of them. I've seen it under allegory, and it's not really an allegory. I've seen it under fantasy. It's not really a fantasy. It has more a nod toward Dante's Inferno, and whatever genre that happens to be. So if you want to figure that out, you go right ahead. I have it under Christian fiction. But the reason I put off reading this book was because I knew it was going to leave me terribly uncomfortable, and I really just didn't feel like dealing with it. The heavy topic in it is forgiveness, but not just forgiveness where you go, hey, and now I forgive you. It's that forgiveness that has that domino effect to other things, because it's easy to say I forgive you. It's whether you believe it and then live it, because sometimes we say, hey, I forgive you, and you move on with your life, but you don't actually act like you have forgiven that person. So it reminds you of that. It reminds you of how we interact with each other on that issue too. So like I said, it wasn't one that I put off because of Sean's writing. In fact, it's because of Sean's writing I put it off, because it's so good. So know that it's probably one that I would probably do an older teenager and up, just because of the issue it does deal with. But his writing is so good. So don't miss out on this one. If you get a chance to read it, I strongly recommend it. And then last but not least, like I said, these are in any order, so I do not want anybody to think that I did Ronnie's book last on purpose. I just happened to be where it is. To be honest with you, I probably could have done about 50 more, because there were a lot of good books that came out in this last year. So Ronnie Kendall's King's Falling is actually book number 2 of the Book of Wars. I purposely skipped book number 1 to see if I could read them out of order. I went back and read book 1. Read them in order, because they do build on each other. I do recommend it. I'm blanking completely, and I apologize, Ronnie, for that, I don't remember book number 1 right now. But there is a book that if evil gets a hold of it, can destroy the world. And so these people are trying to track the book down, hence the title. But there's a lot of action adventure in it. There's a bit of shooting, I will give you that, but there's also some very interesting characters in there, and so I just thoroughly enjoyed reading this book. It was just one of those books where you start reading it, you just disappear into it and enjoy it. I don't know if there's what I would call a mystery, but there is a few elements that would lean towards a mystery in it, so that makes for a good read. I do recommend it to guys, this whole series, and actually almost all of Ronnie's books I have recommended to gentlemen. There is a young man that comes in here, actually he's 18 now, but he's been reading Ronnie's books for the last 4 or 5 years, and he knows before I know that she has a new book coming out, and I love that, because he comes in and says, and every time I see him I cringe, because I'm like, you're going to need to order a book that I don't know exists, right? And he thinks that's hilarious. So and that's the end of our list for book reviews of 2020. Thank you for joining us. I know this has been a little bit different for us this year, but I'll tell you what, it sure has been fun to get together yet and do book reviews. If you have any questions at all, go ahead and put them on the Facebook page, contact me here at the store, or go to the contact button on bakerbookhouse.com, and we will get back to you. Thank you.